Charleston, South Carolina, was sinking into a humid golden dusk, the kind of evening where the oak trees held the heat, the mansions glowed like old money, and the Atlantic breeze carried the smell of jasmine, rain, and something quietly uneasy. The black Mercedes Maybach rolled through the iron gates of the Caldwell estate, with its headlights cutting across the gravel drive. Behind it followed a second car, darker, lower, armored enough to look ordinary, only to people who had never needed protection. Ethan Caldwell sat in the back seat of the lead car, one hand resting against his temple, the other gripping a leather folder stamped with the silver logo of Caldwell Dynamics. He was 34 years old, tall, clean-shaven, and impossibly composed in public, with pale blonde hair combed neatly back and blue eyes that made investors feel seen even when he was calculating 3 exits ahead. To magazines, he was Charleston's youngest tech billionaire, the golden boy who built defense-grade artificial intelligence software out of a converted warehouse and turned it into a company worth billions. To the people who worked closest to him, Ethan was polite, precise, distant, and almost painfully controlled. He remembered birthdays, paid medical bills for employees without asking for thanks, and never once allowed anyone to see him truly tired. He had learned that from his father, a cold banking magnate who believed affection made children weak and mistakes made men useless. Ethan had grown up in rooms full of crystal chandeliers and emotional silence, and somewhere along the way he had mistaken loneliness for discipline. Tonight that discipline was cracking. His company was under attack. Not with bullets, not yet, but with stock manipulation, boardroom whispers, anonymous leaks, and a mysterious shareholder group buying enough influence to force him out of the very thing he had built, with 17-hour days and a body running on coffee and old anger. The signing ceremony downtown had gone well on camera. The smiles were clean, the handshakes were firm, the cameras loved him. But 20 minutes after the press left, his chief financial officer had leaned close and whispered that 3 more board members were considering a hostile vote by Friday. Ethan looked out the tinted window as the estate came into view. Caldwell House rose at the end of the drive like a marble crown, all white stone columns, tall arched windows, slate roof, and warm lanterns burning beneath the portico. It had belonged to his mother's side of the family for nearly a century. He had restored it after her death, not because he needed another house, but because he could not bring himself to sell the last place where she had ever laughed. Beside the mansion, a marble fountain murmured softly in the circular courtyard. Water spilled over carved stone cherubs into a wide basin, glowing faintly under the first amber lights of evening. That was when Ethan saw her. At first, she was only a flash of yellow behind the fountain, something small, something wrong. "Stop the car," Ethan said. The driver hesitated for half a second. "Mr. Caldwell?" "Stop the car." The Maybach halted so sharply the leather folder slid from Ethan's lap onto the floor. The rear security vehicle stopped behind them. Gravel popped under the tires. For 1 second, nobody moved. Then Ethan opened the door. The humid air hit him, warm and heavy, carrying the smell of boxwood hedges and storm clouds gathering somewhere beyond the Ashley River. He stepped onto the gravel, his pale blue suit catching the last light of sunset, and stared toward the fountain. A little girl was crouched behind the stone basin. She could not have been more than 6 years old. She was black, small for her age, with deep brown skin, tear-wet cheeks and tightly braided hair, decorated with tiny white beads, several of them broken or missing. Her yellow dress looked like it had once been pretty, maybe something worn to a birthday party or a church picnic, but now it was ripped near the hem and smeared with mud across the front. One of her shoes was gone, the other was covered in wet dirt. Her eyes were enormous, not just scared, hunted. Ethan took one careful step forward. The girl raised one trembling finger to her lips, Don't!" The gesture was so desperate, so silent, so practiced, that Ethan felt something cold move through his chest. The second car door opened behind him. Marcus Hale stepped out. Marcus was 46, broad-shouldered, dark-skinned, and built like a man carved from old war and iron discipline. He stood 6'5", with a shaved head, a close black beard threaded with grey at the chin, and tattooed forearms that strained against the sleeves of his black security suit. Before Ethan hired him, Marcus had served in Army Special Forces, then spent 6 brutal years as a private security contractor in Afghanistan, protecting diplomats, aid workers, and people rich enough to pay for survival. He spoke softly, moved slowly, and noticed everything. His left hand always stayed near his belt, never touching his weapon unless he had already decided the world had changed. Most people found Marcus intimidating. Children usually did not. Animals trusted him immediately, but loud noises could still pull his mind backward. A dropped tray, a car backfiring, fireworks over the harbour. Sometimes his eyes would go empty for half a second, and in that half second he would be somewhere else, under another sky, smelling diesel smoke and blood in the dust. Now Marcus saw the girl and froze. His gaze moved once across the courtyard, then the hedges, then the upper windows, then the gate. "Sir," he said quietly. Ethan did not look away from the child. "I see her." "Not her." Marcus's voice changed, lower, sharper. Ethan turned. Beyond the iron gates, partly hidden by the shadow of the live oaks lining the private road, a black SUV rolled slowly past the estate. Its headlights were off even though twilight had deepened. The windows were tinted black. It moved too slowly to be passing, too smoothly to be lost. Marcus lifted 2 fingers toward his earpiece. "Gate team, eyes on black Suburban moving eastbound outside the front perimeter. No lights. Plate if you can get it." A crackle answered him. "Copy." "Trying visual now." The little girl flinched at the sound of the radio. Ethan saw it. Her entire body folded inward like she had been struck by memory. He turned back to her and lowered himself slowly onto one knee, ruining the crease of his expensive suit without noticing. "Hey," he said gently, "my name is Ethan. This is my house. Nobody is going to hurt you here." The girl stared at Marcus, then at the gate, then at Ethan. She did not speak. Ethan kept his hands visible. "Are you hurt?" Her lip trembled. She shook her head once, but it was a lie. Children tell adults when pain has become safer than explaining. Marcus moved forward, careful not to crowd her. Despite his size, he lowered his posture, making himself less like a wall and more like shelter. "What's your name, sweetheart?" he asked. The girl swallowed. For a moment, only the fountain answered. Then she whispered, "Ava." The name came out so softly Ethan almost missed it. "Ava?" Ethan repeated, as if anchoring her to the world. "That's a beautiful name. Are your parents nearby?" The girl's eyes filled instantly. She shook her head again. This time, it was not a lie. The front doors of the mansion opened, and Beatrice Monroe hurried down the steps with a cardigan pulled over her house uniform. Beatrice was 68, lean, silver-haired, and sharp-eyed, with the dignified posture of a woman who had spent her life keeping wealthy households from collapsing into chaos. She had worked for Ethan's mother first, back when Caldwell House still smelled of lemon polish and piano music. After Mrs. Caldwell died, Beatrice stayed for Ethan, though she often claimed it was because no one else knew how to stop him from drinking dinner instead of eating it. She was kind to staff, terrifying to contractors, and deeply suspicious of anything that arrived without an appointment. When she saw the child, her face changed, not shock, recognition almost, then fear. "Mr. Caldwell," Beatrice said, her voice tight. "Who is that child?" "I don't know yet." "You cannot bring a strange child into the house without calling the police." "I'm aware." "Then call them." Ethan looked at Ava's bare foot, the mud on her dress, the way she kept glancing toward the gate like something might come through it at any second. "We will," he said, "after she's safe." Beatrice opened her mouth to argue, but Marcus cut in. Someone was watching the gate. That silenced her. Ava suddenly reached out and grabbed Ethan's sleeve. The contact startled him more than it should have. Her hand was tiny, cold, and shaking so badly he could feel the tremor through the fabric. "Please," she whispered. "Don't let them see me." Ethan's jaw tightened. There were moments in life when a man did not decide who he was. He discovered it. Ethan stood, took off his suit jacket, and wrapped it around the little girl's shoulders. The jacket swallowed her whole. "Marcus," he said.
"Already on it. Lock the gates, full perimeter. No one comes in without your approval." Marcus nodded once and spoke into his radio. His calm was absolute, but Ethan saw the muscle jumping in his jaw. The black SUV had triggered something in him, not panic, not fear, recognition of a hunt. Ethan looked at Beatrice. "Prepare the east sitting room, warm towels, food, nothing loud." Beatrice hesitated, still staring at Ava. For a heartbeat, her eyes moved over the girl's braids, the shape of her face, the beads in her hair. Then she whispered something too low for Ethan to catch. "What?" Beatrice blinked and straightened. "Nothing, sir." But it was not nothing. Ethan lifted Ava carefully. She stiffened at first, then clutched his shirt with both hands, as if falling was something she had been doing for a long time. She weighed almost nothing. As they crossed the courtyard, Marcus remained behind, facing the gate, a giant black silhouette between the child and whatever had followed her.
Inside, Caldwell House felt too large for a frightened child. Marble floors, high ceilings, oil portraits, crystal lights, the kind of beauty that could make fear echo. Ethan carried Ava into the east sitting room, where warm lamps glowed over cream walls and old bookshelves. Beatrice returned with towels, a soft blanket, and a tray of chicken soup, biscuits, and sliced peaches. Ava stared at the food but did not touch it until Ethan stepped back. Only then did she eat. Slowly at first, then like she had not eaten properly in days. Ethan watched from across the room, anger building in him with every careful bite. "What is your last name, Ava?" he asked gently. The spoon stopped halfway to her mouth. Ava lowered it. "I'm not supposed to say." "Who told you that?" She looked toward the window. No answer. Beatrice stood near the fireplace, her hands folded so tightly her knuckles had gone pale. Ethan noticed.
"You know something." The old housekeeper's face hardened with the old instinct of servants who had survived by never speaking, before the powerful were ready to listen. "I don't know anything for certain. That wasn't my question." Beatrice looked at Ava again. Her voice dropped. "Several months ago, there was a news story out of Texas. A wealthy family. Oil money, I believe. Their little granddaughter disappeared after her father died in a plane crash. They showed her picture for weeks." Ethan felt the room tilt slightly. "Ava?" he asked. Beatrice's eyes shone with unease. "The child in the broadcast had braids with white beads." Ava's spoon slipped from her hand and hit the bowl with a soft clink. Across the room, Ethan's phone vibrated. He looked down. A message from Marcus. Black SUV circled twice. No plate. Cameras caught partial. Someone is testing us. Ethan looked toward the window. Outside, dusk had deepened into a violet darkness.
The first drops of rain began tapping against the glass. Ava pulled Ethan's jacket tighter around herself and whispered, barely audible, "They found me." Ethan's expression changed. The billionaire, the boardroom strategist, the man trained by money to treat every crisis as a negotiation, disappeared. What remained was colder, older, more dangerous. He turned to Beatrice. "Move her upstairs, interior room, no windows." Then he looked back at the little girl behind the blanket, the one who had appeared at his fountain like a secret the world had failed to bury. "You're safe tonight, Ava," Ethan said. But as the rain began falling harder over Charleston, and the security monitors flickered with shadows moving beyond the hedges, he knew that safety had just become the most expensive promise he had ever made. Morning arrived over Charleston beneath a ceiling of grey coastal clouds and restless wind rattling the magnolia trees outside Caldwell House. Rain from the night before still clung to the marble balconies and wrought iron railings, leaving the estate wrapped in a cold silver haze that made the mansion feel less like a home and more like a fortress waiting for trouble. Ethan Caldwell had slept barely 2 hours. At 6:30 in the morning, he stood alone in the kitchen wearing dark sweatpants and a charcoal Henley instead of the $1,000 suits the world usually saw him in. Without the polished image, he looked younger but far more exhausted. Faint shadows sat beneath his eyes, and the tension in his jaw had become permanent over the last few months. He held a mug of black coffee in one hand while staring at the security monitor feeds lining the kitchen wall. 3 motion alerts overnight, 2 near the eastern hedge line, 1 at the front gate, no clear faces, no plates, just shadows moving with purpose. Behind him, the soft sound of cabinet doors opening broke the silence. Beatrice Monroe moved around the kitchen preparing breakfast with the efficient rhythm of a woman who had spent decades caring for broken rich people without ever letting them notice she was the one holding their lives together. This morning, however, her composure looked thinner. "She's awake," Beatrice said quietly. Ethan looked up. "How is she?" She asked if the windows were bulletproof. The words landed heavily. Ethan set the coffee mug down harder than intended. A few minutes later, he found Ava sitting cross-legged on the floor of the East Library beneath a massive bay window overlooking the rain-soaked gardens. Someone had given her clean clothes, a cream sweater and soft jeans rolled slightly too long at the ankles. But she still looked fragile, like a child waiting for permission to breathe normally again. She was drawing, not random scribbles, precise shapes. The 6-year-old held a colored pencil with unsettling focus, her small brows furrowed in concentration, while sheets of paper surrounded her across the rug. Ava barely noticed Ethan entering the room until thunder rumbled faintly over the harbor in the distance. The sound made her entire body freeze, not flinch, freeze. Her breathing stopped. The pencil slipped from her fingers. Ethan crouched beside her slowly. "Hey, it's okay. Just thunder." Ava nodded too quickly, pretending she believed him. That frightened Ethan more than panic would have. Children who survived fear long enough learned how to hide it. He glanced down at the drawings. Every page showed the same thing. A red room. Sometimes the walls were crimson, sometimes scarlet, sometimes dark maroon, but always red, always with a locked door. Sometimes there were no windows. Sometimes there was a chair in the middle of the room. In one drawing, Ethan noticed tiny black stick figures standing outside the door, while a smaller figure hid beneath a table. "Did you see this place somewhere?" Ethan asked gently. Ava's fingers tightened around the pencil. "I'm not supposed to talk about it." "Who told you that?" She stared at the paper. "The man with the shiny shoes." Ethan felt something tighten in his chest. Before he could ask more, a sudden sharp sound exploded outside, a delivery truck hitting a pothole near the service gate. The metallic bang echoed across the property. Ava screamed, not loudly, worse, instinctively. She threw herself backward against the bookshelf, covering her head with both arms while gasping for breath. Ethan immediately moved toward her. "Ava! Hey! Nobody's here!" But she was no longer seeing the library. Her eyes had gone distant, trapped somewhere else entirely. Marcus entered the room almost instantly, hand already near his concealed weapon before assessing the situation. The massive former soldier relaxed only slightly after realizing there was no active threat. Still, Ethan noticed the way Marcus scanned every exit before lowering himself beside the girl. Marcus spoke softly. "You know where you are?" Ava nodded shakily. "You know nobody touches you here?" Another nod. Marcus glanced at Ethan. Something unspoken passed between the two men. This was no ordinary runaway child. Later that afternoon, rain hammered the mansion windows while financial news played quietly on the television in Ethan's office. A female anchor discussed Caldwell Dynamics' declining stock prices, while analysts debated whether Ethan Caldwell still had control of his own company. Ethan muted it instantly. Marcus stood near the fireplace, scrolling through old news archives on a tablet. Without the security jacket, his broad shoulders and military tattoos became more visible beneath a fitted, dark shirt. A long scar crossed one side of his neck, a souvenir from Kandahar he never explained in detail. Then Marcus stopped scrolling. His expression changed. "Sir?" he said carefully. Ethan looked up. Marcus turned the tablet around. On screen was a year-old news broadcast from Houston, Texas. The headline read, "Hamilton Oil Heiress Still Missing After Private Jet Crash." A family photograph filled the screen. A little girl stood beside a wealthy couple outside a charity gala. Braids with white beads, brown eyes, yellow dress. Ava. Ethan slowly stood. The report explained that Nathaniel Hamilton, heir to the Hamilton energy empire, had died in a mysterious private plane crash 11 months earlier while flying from Dallas to Colorado. Investigators ruled it an accident caused by engine failure, though rumors of sabotage had circulated quietly among federal investigators. Weeks later, Nathaniel's wife Vanessa disappeared along with their daughter Amelia Hamilton. Missing, never found. Marcus stared at the paused image of Ava. "She's not Ava," he said quietly. "She's Amelia Hamilton." The room fell silent except for rain hammering the glass. Ethan rubbed his face slowly. "The Hamilton family is worth billions. Oil money, political connections, lawyers everywhere." Marcus paused. "And enemies." Ethan looked toward the hallway where Ava sat quietly, with Beatrice doing a puzzle, as if she were any ordinary child. "She ran all the way here," Ethan murmured. "No," Marcus corrected softly. "Somebody brought her." That night, Ethan began digging privately into the Hamilton case using his corporate access networks. The deeper he searched, the stranger the story became. Nathaniel Hamilton's crash investigation had been sealed unusually fast. Vanessa Hamilton's disappearance file was buried beneath federal jurisdiction restrictions. Witness statements were incomplete. Surveillance footage from the airport had vanished. Someone powerful had cleaned the trail. At nearly 9 o'clock, the mansion intercom buzzed. Marcus answered first. "Sir," came the voice of the front gate guard. "There's a man here asking for Mr. Caldwell. Says it's urgent legal business." Marcus frowned. "Name?" "Richard Voss." The name hit Marcus instantly. Ethan noticed it immediately. Marcus's posture stiffened the same way it had the night before near the gate. "You know him?" Ethan said. Marcus's eyes darkened. "Unfortunately." 10 minutes later, Richard Voss stepped into Caldwell House like a man entering property he already owned. He was in his late 50s, tall and silver-haired, wearing an expensive navy overcoat over a charcoal suit, tailored so perfectly it looked armored. His face was handsome in the polished way television lawyers often were, but his smile never reached his pale grey eyes. Everything about Richard Voss radiated controlled intelligence and danger. He carried himself calmly, but Marcus recognized the type immediately. Men like Voss rarely raised their voices because they had spent their entire lives making other people disappear quietly. "Mr. Caldwell," Voss said smoothly, extending a hand. "Apologies for the late hour." Ethan ignored the handshake. "What do you want?" Voss smiled faintly as if amused by resistance. "I believe you currently have custody of a minor child belonging to the Hamilton family." Marcus moved subtly closer. Voss noticed him and smiled wider. "Well," Voss said softly, "I suppose Afghanistan truly does send familiar faces everywhere." Marcus's jaw tightened. Years ago, during contractor operations overseas, whispers about Richard Voss had circulated through military intelligence channels. Officially, Voss was an elite international attorney specializing in asset protection and political extraction. Unofficially, rumors linked him to trafficking routes moving children between conflict zones under forged identities. But rumors were not evidence. And men like Richard Voss survived because nobody could prove anything. Voss calmly removed a folder from his briefcase and placed it on the table. "I have temporary emergency guardianship authorization issued through family court in Houston," he said. "The child belongs in my protection immediately." Ethan opened the folder. Stamped documents, court seals, everything looked legitimate. From the hallway, a small voice suddenly whispered, "No." Everyone turned. Ava stood frozen near the doorway, trembling violently at the sight of Richard Voss. And for the first time since arriving at Caldwell House, the little girl looked truly terrified. Voss smiled gently toward her, but his eyes remained completely dead. "Amelia," he said softly, "it's time to come home." The storm arrived over Charleston just after midnight, swallowing the coastline beneath sheets of cold rain and rolling thunder that shook the tall windows of Caldwell House. The mansion sat glowing against the darkness like an isolated ship at sea, its marble walls reflecting flashes of lightning while wind tore through the magnolia trees surrounding the estate. Somewhere beyond the gates, the Atlantic churned beneath black skies, and inside the house, nobody was sleeping anymore. Richard Voss had been gone less than 4 hours, but his presence still lingered like smoke. Ethan Caldwell stood barefoot in his office, staring at the city lights barely visible through the rain-streaked glass. His tie hung loose around his neck, and the top buttons of his white dress shirt were undone, exposing the strain that polished interviews and magazine covers never showed. On the television behind him, financial analysts dissected Caldwell dynamics in sharp, rehearsed voices.
Anonymous investors now control nearly 22% of company shares. Speculation continues surrounding a possible forced acquisition. Sources inside the board claim internal divisions are worsening. Ethan muted the television again. His company was bleeding, and somehow Richard Voss had appeared the exact same week. That coincidence bothered him more than the market crash itself. A soft knock interrupted his thoughts. Marcus stepped inside, carrying a tablet in one hand and a steaming mug of coffee in the other. The former soldier looked exhausted beneath the dim office lights. Deep shadows rested beneath his eyes, and tension sat visibly across his massive shoulders. Marcus had not removed his sidearms since Voss visited the estate. "You should eat something," Marcus said. Ethan accepted the coffee instead. "Anything from Houston?" Marcus shook his head once. Every legal document Voss brought checks out.
Guardianship order looks authentic. Looks authentic isn't the same thing. No. Marcus paused. But it's good enough to move a child across state lines before anyone asks questions. Ethan stared into the dark liquid inside the mug. You still think he's dirty? Marcus let out a humorless laugh. Men like Voss don't get rich protecting children. The room fell quiet for a moment except for rain hammering the roof. Then Marcus slid the tablet across the desk. I ran deeper searches through some old contacts overseas. Ethan looked down. Several encrypted files appeared on screen alongside photographs from years earlier. Cargo manifests, satellite images, names blacked out in red. One of my former intelligence guys in Kabul remembers Voss, Marcus said carefully. Not officially, off the record. Human trafficking routes disguised as refugee extractions after military evacuations. Ethan looked up sharply. Children? Marcus nodded once. No hard evidence? Every witness either disappeared or recanted, but his name kept surfacing around missing kids. Before Ethan could respond, the lights flickered. Once, twice. Then the office went completely black. The entire mansion lost power. Marcus was moving before the darkness fully settled. Years of combat training took over instantly. He drew his weapon with one hand while reaching for Ethan with the other. Stay behind me. Lightning flashed outside the windows, illuminating the office in violent white bursts. Somewhere downstairs a woman screamed, Beatrice. Marcus immediately spoke into his earpiece. Power outage! Full security sweep! Report now! Only static answered him. His expression hardened. The radios are jammed. Downstairs, Caldwell House had transformed into a maze of shadows and stormlight. Emergency backup lamps flickered weakly along the hallways, while rain battered the tall windows, hard enough to sound like fists against glass. Ethan followed Marcus through the mansion toward the east wing where Ava's room was located. Halfway there, they found Beatrice Monroe standing near the staircase clutching a candle holder with trembling fingers. For the first time since Ethan had known her, the old housekeeper genuinely looked frightened. The cameras, she whispered. They all went dead. Marcus checked his phone. No signal. That's not random, he muttered. Then Ethan noticed something else. Ava. Beatrice's face drained of colour. She was asleep 10 minutes ago. Marcus was already running. They reached Ava's bedroom and found the door half open, curtains blowing violently beside an unlocked window. Rainwater soaked the hardwood floor beneath it. The bed was empty. Ethan felt ice flood his veins. Ava! No answer. Marcus crouched near the window frame. His sharp, dark eyes scanned the floor instantly. Mud! Large boot prints tracked across the carpet. Not Ava's. Outside, the storm raged harder. Marcus climbed through the window into the rain without hesitation. Ethan followed immediately despite the cold water soaking through his clothes within seconds. Security guards rushed across the courtyard with flashlights, but Marcus ignored them all, focused entirely on the ground. The trail led toward the greenhouse near the southern gardens. Thunder cracked overhead as Marcus suddenly stopped near the hedges. There, fresh footprints disappeared into the woods bordering the estate. And beneath the rain came another sound, a muffled cry. Marcus ran. Branches whipped against his face as he charged through the forest with terrifying speed for a man his size. Ethan struggled behind him while flashlight beams bounced wildly between soaked pine trunks. Somewhere ahead, an engine roared alive. Marcus burst through the trees into a muddy service road just as a black SUV came into view beside the creek. Two masked men were forcing Ava into the back seat. She was screaming now. One of the kidnappers reached for the door. Marcus hit him like a freight train. The impact slammed the masked man against the vehicle hard enough to dent metal. The second attacker pulled a handgun, but Marcus grabbed his wrist mid-draw and broke it with brutal efficiency before driving him face first into the mud. The SUV driver panicked and accelerated. Marcus ripped the rear door open before it fully closed. Ava lunged toward him instantly. The second masked man swung a knife wildly in desperation. Marcus blocked the strike with his forearm and drove the attacker backward into the rain-soaked gravel. Years of violence moved through him again with horrifying precision, not rage, training. The driver abandoned the SUV and fled into the woods alongside the remaining attacker moments before estate security finally arrived. Marcus barely noticed. He was kneeling beside Ava in the mud, one massive hand resting gently against the back of her head while she sobbed uncontrollably against his chest. "It's okay," he murmured softly. "You're okay now." Ethan reached them seconds later, breathless. Ava looked up at him with tears streaming down her face. Rain soaked her braids and sweater, while terror shook her tiny body so violently she could barely speak. "They found me!" she cried. "I told you they would!" Marcus wrapped his jacket around her immediately. Then Ava whispered something else, something that made both men freeze. "I saw them kill my daddy!" The storm seemed to go silent around them. Ava buried her face against Marcus again, her small fingers clutching desperately at his soaked shirt. "They said it was an accident," she sobbed. But it wasn't. Marcus exchanged a dark look with Ethan. Back inside the mansion, nearly an hour later, Ava sat curled beneath a blanket in the east sitting room while Beatrice prepared tea with visibly shaking hands. Marcus remained near the doorway like a silent wall between the child and the world outside. Ethan noticed Beatrice staring at Ava strangely again. "You know something else," he said quietly. The old housekeeper hesitated, then finally nodded. "I worked for the Hamilton family briefly when I was younger," she admitted softly. "Before Charleston, before your mother hired me." Ethan blinked in surprise. Beatrice stared into her teacup. "Nathaniel Hamilton used to visit this estate as a boy. His grandmother and your mother were close friends." Her eyes drifted toward Ava. "That child has her mother's eyes." Ava looked up weakly. "Do you know my mommy?" Beatrice's face crumpled for half a second before recovering. "No, sweetheart," she whispered. "But I think she loved you very much." Upstairs, another security monitor suddenly flickered back to life. For half a second, static rolled across the screen. Then an image appeared. Someone inside the estate security system was watching them remotely. And before the monitor died again, Ethan caught a glimpse of a familiar silver-haired man smiling calmly into the camera. Richard Voss. The storm finally passed sometime before dawn, leaving Charleston buried beneath cold fog and seawater grey skies. Caldwell House stood unnaturally quiet after the violence of the night before. Broken branches littered the gardens. Mud stained the marble hallways near the east wing. Security teams moved through the estate with exhausted faces and loaded weapons, while police cruisers remained parked discreetly beyond the gates, though Ethan had deliberately kept Ava's identity hidden from local authorities. Trust had become dangerous. Inside the mansion library, Ava sat curled beneath a blanket on the oversized leather couch with a box of crayons resting in her lap. For the first time since arriving at the estate, she no longer looked at Ethan like a stranger. Trauma still haunted every movement she made, but something had shifted after Marcus pulled her out of the rain-soaked forest. She had stopped asking if they were coming. Now she only asked whether Marcus was nearby. The former soldier sat across from her cleaning mud from a combat knife at the long oak table. Morning light exposed the deeper exhaustion beneath his hardened appearance. Marcus Hale had always carried himself like a man expecting war to return eventually. But today felt different. Something old had awakened in him after the attempted kidnapping. Not fear, purpose. Ava quietly slid another drawing across the table. Marcus studied it carefully. Again, the red room, but this time there was more detail. A staircase, large ocean-facing windows, and outside the windows rough black water crashing against cliffs beneath a lighthouse. Marcus frowned slightly. "Georgia coastline," he murmured. Ethan looked up from his laptop. "You recognize it?" Marcus nodded slowly. "Not the building, the shoreline." He tapped the drawing. "When I was contracting overseas, trafficking routes used private coastal properties all the time. Harder to track."
Easier to move people offshore. Ava lowered her eyes immediately after hearing the word people. Not children, people. Like she no longer believed children and cargo were different things. Ethan closed the laptop. "Can you find it?" Marcus stared at the drawing again. Maybe. 3 hours later, a black Range Rover moved south along the coastal highway toward Georgia, beneath low storm clouds and cold Atlantic wind. Ethan sat in the passenger seat while Marcus drove in complete silence, one massive hand resting calmly against the wheel. The further they traveled from Charleston, the rougher the coastline became. Marshlands gave way to pine forests and abandoned fishing towns where old docks leaned crookedly into dark water. In the back seat, Ava slept curled beneath Ethan's jacket. At some point during the drive, her small hand had unconsciously wrapped around Marcus's sleeve. Neither man mentioned it.
By late afternoon, they reached Blackwater Point, a nearly forgotten stretch of coastline north of Savannah. The place looked abandoned by time itself. Rusted shrimp boats rocked against rotting docks while sea fog drifted across empty roads lined with decaying Victorian homes. Near the cliffs overlooking the Atlantic stood a massive seaside mansion hidden behind dead hedges and collapsing iron gates. The house matched Ava's drawings perfectly. The windows, the tower, even the stone staircase leading toward the ocean. Marcus parked several hundred yards away beneath a cluster of pine trees. Rain began falling again. "Stay here," Ethan told Ava gently. Her frightened eyes immediately widened. Marcus turned in his seat. "You'll be safer inside the vehicle. Doors stay locked, understand?" Ava hesitated before nodding weakly. Then, very softly, she asked, "You're coming back?" Something about the question hit Ethan harder than expected. "Yes," he answered immediately. Marcus checked his handgun and opened the door. "Let's move." The abandoned mansion smelled of salt water, mildew, and forgotten violence. Every floorboard groaned beneath their footsteps as they moved through dark hallways covered in peeling wallpaper and water damage. Old chandeliers swung faintly overhead whenever wind pushed against the broken windows. Ethan's pulse hammered harder with every room they cleared. He hated this feeling, the uncertainty, the vulnerability. Boardrooms had rules, negotiations had patterns, but this place felt alive with danger in ways money could not control. Marcus moved ahead like instinct itself, every sense tuned toward threats invisible to ordinary people. Years ago in Afghanistan, entering abandoned compounds had often meant deciding whether men lived another 10 minutes. That awareness never truly left him. At the end of the western hallway, they found the red room. Ethan stopped breathing for half a second. The walls were painted dark crimson. Children's drawings covered one side of the room. A rusted metal bed frame sat against the corner beside restraints bolted into the floor, and near the far wall stood a heavy steel door with multiple locks. Marcus's jaw tightened violently. Jesus Christ! Ethan moved slowly through the room, horror crawling up his spine. Small shoes remained scattered beneath the bed. Stuffed animals, blankets. Children had lived here or been kept here. Marcus noticed a hidden panel partially exposed behind a collapsed bookshelf. Inside sat stacks of folders sealed in waterproof containers. Ethan opened one. His face drained of color immediately. Birth certificates, adoption transfers, fake custody records, dozens of wealthy family names, children reassigned like property. Then Marcus found another file, Hamilton, Nathaniel. Inside were flight records, insurance transfers, banking statements, and satellite photographs of the private jet crash site. None of it looked accidental. Ethan flipped through pages rapidly until he found a signed authorization form connected to the aircraft maintenance company. Richard Voss. Marcus cursed under his breath. He killed Ava's father. No, Ethan said quietly, while reading another page. He had him killed. Outside, thunder rolled across the ocean. Then Marcus heard something, a click. Tiny, mechanical. His head snapped upward instantly. Move! Gunfire exploded through the hallway windows. Glass shattered inward. Ethan hit the floor as bullets tore through the red room walls. Marcus grabbed him by the collar and shoved him behind the steel bed frame, seconds before masked gunmen stormed the corridor. 3 attackers, military movement, professional. Marcus fired twice with terrifying calm precision. 1 gunman collapsed immediately. The second dove behind the doorway while the third circled toward the staircase. Back exit, Marcus barked. But Ethan froze for half a second too long, not from cowardice, from shock. Real violence moved differently than movies or security briefings. Louder, faster, more chaotic. 1 attacker suddenly appeared beside the doorway and fired. Marcus shoved Ethan sideways just as the bullet struck him beneath the ribs. The impact slammed the massive former soldier against the wall. Marcus! Move! Blood spread quickly across Marcus's dark jacket, but he forced himself upright anyway, firing again while dragging Ethan toward the hallway. The old war inside him had returned completely now. Every instinct, every survival reflex, every nightmare Afghanistan had carved into his nervous system. But this time, he was not fighting for money, or contracts, or politicians. He was fighting for a little girl. They barely reached the staircase before another gunman emerged below. Ethan reacted first, not thinking, just moving. He grabbed a broken wooden lamp from the hallway table and swung it with desperate force into the attacker's face, hard enough to send both men crashing down the stairs. Pain exploded through Ethan's shoulder. The attacker reached for his handgun. Ethan hit him again and again, until the weapon skidded across the floor. Somewhere above him, Marcus eliminated the final shooter with a single deafening shot. Silence crashed over the mansion except for rain and Ethan's ragged breathing. He stared at his shaking hands. Marcus limped toward him, blood soaking through his side. "You okay?" Ethan looked up slowly. For the first time in his life, nobody had protected him first. He had protected someone else. Back outside near the Range Rover, Ava burst into tears the moment she saw Marcus injured. Ethan helped the wounded man into the vehicle while ocean wind whipped rain across the cliffs. Marcus gritted his teeth through the pain. "Glove compartment." Ethan opened it. Inside sat a military trauma kit. "Still carrying those?" Ethan asked shakily. Marcus forced a weak grin. "Old habits." While Ethan pressed gauze against the wound, Ava crawled carefully toward Marcus from the back seat. Her small face trembled with fear. Then she wrapped both arms tightly around him. Marcus froze completely. The child buried her face against his shoulder and whispered the quietest word Ethan had heard since this nightmare began. "Family." Marcus closed his eyes for one brief moment. Outside, lightning flashed over the Atlantic, while the abandoned mansion disappeared behind rain and darkness. But now they finally had proof. And Richard Voss was no longer just a powerful lawyer. He was a murderer. Charleston disappeared beneath smoke-colored clouds as night settled over Caldwell House for what felt like the final time. The old estate stood glowing against the dark hills above the river, its white stone walls illuminated by security floodlights and rolling sheets of distant lightning over the Atlantic. Police scanners crackled somewhere inside the mansion. Armed guards patrolled the perimeter. Every gate remained locked. And still, Ethan Caldwell knew it would not be enough. Inside the East Wing medical room, Marcus Hale sat shirtless, while a field medic stitched the gunshot wound beneath his ribs. The former soldier remained perfectly still despite the needle-piercing, damaged flesh, again and again. Sweat rolled slowly down the side of his shaved head, but he never complained. Pain had become an old language to him years ago in Afghanistan. The medic working on him was Elena Ruiz, a former Navy corpsman in her early 40s, with dark, curly hair tied tightly behind her head and tired brown eyes that had seen too many broken bodies survive impossible things. Marcus trusted very few people alive, but Elena was one of them. Years earlier, she had dragged him bleeding through a mortar attack outside Kandahar after an explosion killed half their convoy. "You should be in a hospital," Elena muttered while tightening the final stitch. Marcus gave a faint grin. "Hospitals are easier to burn down." Elena didn't laugh, because both of them knew he meant it. Across the room, Ava slept, curled beneath a blanket on the couch beside the old golden retriever that belonged to the estate. The dog's name was Winston. He was nearly 13 years old, slow-moving, half-blind, and covered in golden fur, faded white, around the muzzle with age. Winston had belonged to Ethan's mother before cancer took her years earlier. Since then, the old dog followed Ethan everywhere with quiet loyalty, sleeping beside his office door during long nights and waiting patiently outside empty rooms as if still searching for the woman who used to sing to him in the gardens. Tonight Winston refused to leave Ava's side. The child's fingers rested gently against his fur while she slept deeper than anyone had seen since arriving at the mansion. No nightmares, no screaming, just exhaustion, finally surrendering to safety. Ethan stood near the rain-covered windows, staring down at the driveway below. He looked different now, harder. The expensive billionaire image had started peeling away over the last few days, exposing someone rawer underneath. His knuckles were bruised from the fight at Blackwater Point, and there was still dried blood beneath one fingernail he had missed while washing up. He no longer looked like a man protected by walls. He looked like a man preparing for war. Marcus rose slowly from the chair, despite Elena's glare. "You shouldn't be standing. I've had worse. That bullet missed your lung by less than an inch." Marcus reached for his black jacket anyway. Ethan turned toward him. "You sent the files?" Marcus nodded. "Everything from the Red Room. I pushed copies through an encrypted military channel." "To who?" A faint shadow crossed Marcus's face. "An old friend." At nearly midnight, the storm returned. Wind slammed against Caldwell House hard enough to shake the windows while thunder rolled across Charleston like distant artillery fire. Somewhere outside the estate, transformers flickered blue against the dark horizon. Marcus froze briefly at the sound. For half a second, Ethan saw Afghanistan return to his eyes again. Then Marcus forced himself back to the present. "I'm fine," he muttered before Ethan could ask. But he wasn't. None of them were. The first explosion hit the western gate at 12:17 a.m. The blast shook the mansion like an earthquake. Ava jolted awake instantly. Winston barked furiously. Every security alarm screamed at once. Marcus grabbed his weapon before the echo finished rolling through the halls. "They're here!" Outside, flames rose violently near the front perimeter, where the iron gates twisted apart beneath burning debris. Black SUVs stormed through the smoke, while masked gunmen poured onto the estate grounds carrying military rifles. Caldwell House erupted into chaos. Gunfire shattered windows. Security guards returned fire from the balconies. Smoke alarms wailed through every corridor, while terrified staff fled deeper into the mansion. Ethan grabbed Ava immediately. "Stay with Marcus!" Another explosion detonated near the garage. The lights went out. Emergency generators kicked in seconds later, flooding the hallways with pulsing red backup lights that transformed the mansion into something nightmarish. Marcus looked toward the wine cellar entrance. "Tunnel?" Ethan blinked once. "There's still access?" "Your grandfather used it during hurricane evacuations. Beatrice showed me yesterday." More gunfire thundered downstairs. Marcus knelt carefully in front of Ava, despite blood already soaking through fresh bandages beneath his jacket. "You remember what I taught you?" he asked calmly. Ava nodded with trembling lips. "Stay low, stay quiet, hold on to Winston." The old dog stood shakily beside her as if understanding every word. Marcus looked at Ethan next. "You get the hard drive to the FBI." "You're bleeding out." "And you're wasting time." Then the front doors exploded inward. Masked men stormed the foyer. Marcus drew his weapon instantly. "Move!" The wine cellar tunnel smelled of dust, wet stone, and old earth. Ava clutched Winston tightly while Marcus guided them through the narrow underground passage beneath the estate. Every distant explosion above them echoed through the tunnel walls like bombs underground. For Marcus, the sounds became something else entirely. Afghanistan. Smoke. Collapsed buildings. Screaming over broken radios. For years he had lived trapped between memories and guilt, haunted by civilians he failed to save during contractor evacuations overseas. Children, especially. Their faces stayed with him long after missions ended. But tonight was different. Tonight, one little girl was alive because he refused to leave her behind, and somehow, against all logic, that mattered enough to quiet the ghosts. Back upstairs, Ethan moved through the burning mansion toward the library with smoke filling the corridors around him. Flames crawled across curtains and wooden walls while shattered chandeliers littered the marble floors. Somewhere outside, sirens screamed faintly in the distance. Then Ethan heard slow applause. Richard Voss stepped from the smoke near the library doorway. The older man looked disturbingly calm despite the inferno consuming the estate around them. His silver hair remained perfectly combed. Rainwater glistened across his overcoat, as if even fire refused to touch him. "You should have handed her over," Voss said softly. Ethan's entire body tightened. "You murdered Nathaniel Hamilton." Voss smiled faintly. Nathaniel was weak. Wealth without instinct eventually belongs to stronger men. The library burned around them as Voss calmly walked between falling embers and shattered bookshelves. "For years," he continued, "families like the Hamiltons trusted people like me to protect generational wealth. Then I realized something very simple." His pale eyes lifted toward Ethan. "Inheritance is easier to control when heirs disappear." Ethan felt sick. "You trafficked children." "I relocated assets." Rage exploded through Ethan so violently he barely recognized himself anymore. Voss reached slowly inside his coat. Ethan attacked first. The two men crashed into the burning desk as flames spread across the curtains behind them. Voss was older but far stronger than Ethan expected. Years of survival had taught him brutality beneath refinement. They slammed into shelves while smoke poured across the ceiling. Then somewhere upstairs came barking. Winston. Ethan froze, the old dog, still inside. Voss used the distraction to strike him hard across the jaw. Ethan crashed against the floor, coughing violently from smoke, but instead of running, he turned and sprinted deeper into the burning hallway toward the sound of barking. "Ethan!" Marcus's voice roared faintly through Ethan's earpiece from somewhere outside. The ceiling groaned overhead, flames consumed the staircase, and near the collapsed corridor, Ethan finally found Winston, trapped beneath burning debris, growling weakly through smoke and sparks. Ethan ignored the fire scorching his sleeves and lifted the heavy wooden beam with both arms despite the heat tearing through his skin. "Come on, old man." Winston crawled free just as part of the ceiling collapsed behind them. Outside the mansion, police sirens suddenly multiplied across the hills. Then came helicopters. Floodlights exploded across the estate. FBI vehicles stormed through the shattered gates, while armed federal agents flooded the grounds. Richard Voss emerged from the smoke-covered front entrance seconds later, only to find dozens of rifles aimed directly at him. Standing beside the lead vehicle was a tall, black woman in a dark FBI raincoat, her posture sharp and commanding, despite the storm raging around her. Special Agent Naomi Brooks looked to be in her late 30s, athletic, calm, and utterly unafraid. Her reputation inside federal organized crime divisions was legendary for one simple reason. Naomi Brooks never lost targets twice. "Richard Voss," she called coldly, "federal agents, on your knees." Voss slowly smiled as rain poured over the burning mansion behind him. Then Marcus emerged from the tunnel entrance beside Ava. Alive. Safe. The moment Ava saw Ethan carrying Winston through the smoke, she broke free from Marcus and ran toward him. And for the first time since her world collapsed, she was smiling. Summer arrived slowly over Charleston, coating the city in golden sunlight, salt air, and the heavy perfume of blooming magnolia trees. 6 months after the fire at Caldwell House, the scars still remained, if someone looked closely enough. Part of the western wing was under reconstruction, fresh white stone replacing sections blackened by smoke. Some nights, workers still hauled debris from the old library where Richard Voss had finally lost control of the empire he built from stolen identities and dead children. But the estate no longer felt haunted. For the first time in years, it felt lived in. The sound of laughter had returned to the gardens. On a warm July afternoon, Ethan Caldwell sat beside the pool behind the mansion with his sleeves rolled to his elbows and a stack of legal documents abandoned untouched beside him. His appearance had changed over the past 6 months in subtle but undeniable ways. The billionaire Polish remained. The expensive watches, tailored clothes, controlled posture. But the sharp loneliness people once noticed around him had softened. There was color in his face now. He smiled more easily. Some mornings he even forgot to check stock prices before sunrise. Caldwell Dynamics had survived. Barely. The hostile shareholders connected to Richard Voss had collapsed after federal investigations uncovered years of financial manipulation tied to offshore accounts and illegal acquisitions. Ethan had refused every offer to sell the company despite enormous pressure from investors who wanted him gone after the scandal. Instead, he shocked Wall Street by restructuring part of the company into a non-profit technology division dedicated to locating missing children and dismantling trafficking networks through surveillance analysis software. The Caldwell Foundation officially opened 2 months earlier, and suddenly Ethan Caldwell became known for something other than wealth. Across the lawn, Ava ran barefoot through the grass, laughing as Winston chased behind her with surprising energy for a dog his age. The old golden retriever still moved slower than before the fire, and patches of singed fur had never fully grown back along one side, but his tail wagged constantly now. Ava had tied a blue ribbon loosely around his collar, earlier that morning because she said heroes should dress fancy. The little girl looked completely different from the terrified child who once hid behind the fountain. Her braids were neater now, decorated with tiny gold beads Beatrice had bought downtown. Sunlight glowed across her dark skin while she sprinted through the gardens, wearing a pale yellow sundress, almost identical to the ruined one she arrived in months earlier. But this dress carried no fear, only memory. Near the far end of the property, Marcus Hale stood beneath a shaded pavilion, watching several military veterans move through a self-defense training course. Some were amputees, some carried scars visible beneath tank tops and old uniforms. Others carried wounds nobody could see at all. Marcus had started the classes quietly after the FBI raid. No publicity, no interviews, just free weekly training sessions for veterans struggling with PTSD, isolation, or addiction after returning home from war. At first, only 3 men showed up. Now, more than 40 attended regularly. Marcus still walked with stiffness from the gunshot wound, especially in humid weather, but he seemed lighter somehow. The constant tension in his shoulders had eased. The nightmares still came sometimes, but not every night anymore. For years, Marcus believed survival was punishment. Ava changed that. A former Marine named Caleb Mercer adjusted a punching bag nearby while watching Marcus with admiration. Caleb was 28, broad-chested, heavily tattooed, and missing 2 fingers from an IED blast in Fallujah. Like many of the veterans there, he trusted Marcus because Marcus never pretended healing was clean or inspirational. "Never thought I'd see you smiling, old man," Caleb joked. Marcus snorted softly. "Don't spread rumors." Across the pavilion, Ava suddenly appeared, holding 2 dripping popsicles in her hands. "One for you," she announced proudly. Marcus accepted it with mock seriousness. "Best tactical support I've had in years." Ava grinned. Then, almost casually, she wrapped one arm around his waist before running back toward the house. Marcus froze briefly, watching her go. For a man who once believed he was too damaged to belong anywhere, the feeling in his chest still confused him sometimes. Peace felt unfamiliar. Near sunset, a black government sedan rolled slowly through the front gates of Caldwell House. Ethan looked up from his chair as Special Agent Naomi Brooks stepped out wearing dark sunglasses and a fitted cream blouse beneath her FBI blazer. Away from active investigations, Naomi appeared softer than she had during the raid months earlier, though the sharp intelligence in her dark eyes never disappeared. Naomi Brooks had spent most of her adult life chasing organized crime syndicates across the country after her younger sister vanished into a trafficking ring at 16 and was never found. That loss hardened her early. It turned her into the kind of federal agent criminals feared because she took every missing child personally. At first, Ethan and Naomi barely tolerated each other. Now she stayed for dinner twice a week. "Your board members still hate me?" she asked while walking toward him. Ethan smiled faintly. "Only the guilty ones." Naomi leaned down and kissed him gently before sitting beside him. 6 months ago, Ethan Caldwell would have considered vulnerability a weakness. Now he found himself memorizing little things instead. The way Naomi laughed quietly when truly relaxed, or how she always removed her FBI badge before entering the estate because she wanted Ava to associate her with safety instead of investigations. Inside the mansion, Beatrice Monroe watched them from the kitchen window with quiet satisfaction while pretending not to. Some wounds healed slowly. Others healed when people stayed. Later that evening, the warm Charleston sunset painted the estate in golden amber as Ava knelt near the front gardens, holding a tiny magnolia sapling between her dirt-covered hands. Ethan crouched beside her, helping straighten the roots while Winston rested nearby in the grass. "You sure you want it here?" Ethan asked. Ava nodded seriously. "It's supposed to grow big." The magnolia tree looked fragile against the enormous estate behind it. Thin branches, tiny leaves, barely strong enough to survive strong wind, but still alive. Marcus stepped onto the porch carrying iced tea, while Naomi followed behind him. The four adults watched quietly as Ava carefully covered the roots with soil. "My mummy liked magnolia trees," Ava said softly. Months earlier, federal investigators finally located Vanessa Hamilton alive inside a witness protection program connected to a sealed trafficking investigation. Years of fear and trauma had left her emotionally shattered, but alive. After weeks of private meetings and tearful conversations, Vanessa made the decision no mother should ever have to make. She let Ava stay in Charleston. Not because she didn't love her daughter, but because she finally saw her daughter smiling again. Ava finished patting dirt around the sapling before standing up proudly. "It's home now," she announced. The word lingered in the warm evening air. Home. Ethan looked around slowly. At Marcus laughing quietly with Naomi near the porch steps. At Winston snoring softly in the grass. At Beatrice watching from the kitchen with tears hidden behind a smile. At the little girl standing beside the magnolia tree she planted with her own hands. 6 months earlier, Ethan Caldwell had lived surrounded by wealth, power, and silence so complete it hollowed him out from the inside. Now the mansion was noisy, messy, alive. And for the first time in his life, the billionaire who once trusted nothing except money finally understood something simple enough to terrify him. Family was never the people who shared your blood. Family was the people who stayed when everything else burned down. As sunset faded across Charleston and fireflies began glowing above the gardens, Ava slipped her small hand into Ethan's. This time, she didn't let go. Sometimes the people who save our lives are not the ones we were born with, but the ones who choose to stay when we are broken, afraid, and lost. In everyday life, we often pass strangers without realizing how much pain they may be carrying inside. A small act of kindness, one moment of protection, or simply choosing not to give up on someone can completely change the direction of a life. This story reminds us that healing does not happen overnight. Some people are fighting battles nobody can see. Some children are still waiting for a safe place to call home. Some adults are still trying to recover from wounds the world told them to hide. But even after tragedy, betrayal, and darkness, love and loyalty can still rebuild what fear tried to destroy. If this story touched your heart, take a moment to hug your family a little tighter tonight. Check on someone who may be struggling in silence, and never underestimate the power of staying beside the people who need you most. Please share this video with someone who still believes kindness matters. Leave a comment below and tell us where you are watching from and what moment touched your heart the most. If you enjoy emotional stories of hope, healing, and second chances, subscribe to the channel so you never miss our next journey. May God bless you, protect your family, heal every hidden wound in your heart, and bring peace into your home tonight. If you believe love is stronger than fear, comment Amen below.